In the early 1940s, the Crump political machine extended its way into McMinn County, Tennessee, with the introduction of Paul Cantrell as sheriff. Cantrell ran on the platform that he would end fee grabbing and won his election in a landslide victory. During this time, the sheriff and his deputies were paid under a system where they would receive a certain amount of money for every person they booked. This led to a corrupt system where people would be booked for drunkenness, regardless of their actual intoxication level. In order to keep this system going, Cantrell would intimidate voters and allow ineligible people to vote if they promised to vote for him. Cantrell would also raise the poll taxes for those who would not promise to vote for him, and his officials would count the votes, making sure he would not lose. At this time, you had to pay a poll tax in order to vote. Cantrell would not tell the public the deadline to pay the poll tax until it was too late, unless he knew that they would vote for him. It was even common for dead people's votes to show up in the election results for Cantrell. During the years of this corruption, the men of McMinn County were fighting for their lives across the world in World War II. When the war was over, 3,000 young men of McMinn County, Tennessee returned home. For context, this was about 10% of the total population. When the men who had just returned home from fighting a war for freedom heard of the corruption in the local government, they realized they needed to make a change and rebel against those powers. They wanted a fraud-free election where the people who were being affected could actually vote and make their choices heard. So in May of 1946, a meeting was called of GIs. In order to get into this meeting, a vet ID was required. In their decision, Knox Henry was elected to run against Cantrell for sheriff. Henry was a respected and decorated veteran. He served in the North African campaign of World War II. After this, the veterans went around town telling everyone to vote, because it would now count. They would go door to door and drive around town trying to get the word out about their campaign. They even came up with their famous slogan, "Your vote will be counted as cast." After months of campaigning, the day had finally come. Well aware of their situation, on August 1st, the day the ballots opened, there were over 200 armed patrolmen monitoring the poll sites. For context, at this time, around 15 patrolmen was the typical amount. Around 3 p.m., a patrolman named Wendy Weiss stopped a black gentleman named Tom Gillespie from casting his vote. He struck Tom with brass knuckles, and when Tom ran, he shot him in the back. Tom survived, but the veterans' promise to keep everyone safe was broken, and they were not going to let that happen. Following the shooting, 2 of the veteran poll watchers were seized and held hostage inside the waterworks building. As the vets saw the crowd screaming for them, they threw themselves against a glass window and broke it. Bloody and cut, they ran out of the building and into the crowd for protection. Soon after this, the chief deputy sent 2 of his men to the GI headquarters. The men were disarmed and taken prisoner. 2 more men were sent, and the same happened to them. Soon after that, 3 more were sent with their pistols drawn, but they were promptly taken inside with the rest of the men and taken prisoner. Back at one of the precincts, 2 of the vets saw Minus Wilburn, a man who worked for Cantrell, let a woman vote who did not have a poll tax receipt or her name on the registration list. One of the GI veterans who was poll watching, Bob Harrell, was fed up with his behavior of allowing anyone to vote as long as they voted for Cantrell. When Harrell tried to stop the woman from voting, Wilburn kicked him in the face and closed the precinct, taking the GIs captive. And just as it seemed like Cantrell had won again, Bill White, one of the main leaders of the veterans, gave a speech that inspired all of the men to fight. He told them that they had given 4 to 5 years of their lives for freedom, and they would not put up with tyrannical behavior here at home. So what was the next move? White gathered guns, trucks, and ammunition, and as many veterans as he could find. These weapons were not fancy. Most of them were hunting rifles and pistols, but that did not matter. They were determined to make things right. Reports vary on how many veterans actually showed up, but it is believed to have been around 300, with some reports estimating 600. The veterans gathered around the building on the street. White, from the street, shouted at the men inside the building to bring the ballot box out, but after a short while, nothing happened. White then fired the first shot. After that, the rest of the veterans started firing, and then after that, the deputies and the sheriff started firing back at them. For hours, the men shot back and forth, but nothing happened. A few minor injuries occurred, but there was nothing really serious. After being fed up, the veterans got the bright idea to make Molotov cocktails, trying to get the men out of the building. They threw them at the building, but the building was made out of brick. The gas bombs did little to no damage. Around 2:30 a.m., the GIs came up with the idea of using dynamite. Around that same time, an ambulance came in to get any wounded out of the building. Little did the veterans know that Paul Cantrell was smuggled out of the building inside the ambulance. Their ringleader was now gone. Soon after, the veterans threw the dynamite at the jail. 4 bundles of dynamite later, the building was in ruin, and the jail's defenders gladly handed over the true ballot boxes to the vets. The votes were counted, and all the GI candidates won in overwhelming fashion. Miraculously, there was not a single death, making this the only armed rebellion with no casualties that achieved exactly what they set out to do. The GIs even advised the townspeople to be civil towards the ex-deputies, even though they hated them more than any of the veterans did and probably would have killed them given the chance. Now, you might be wondering, why was this event so significant? What did it accomplish? Well, first of all, the veterans put an end to years of corruption, police brutality, voter fraud, and predatory policing put in place by the previous Crump administration. They were also able to force democratic change. While the methods they used were very illegal and could have landed them in prison for a lifetime, the veterans were willing to make the sacrifice. They did not care. Even after coming home from giving years of their life to serving the country, they were more worried about making their community a better place. But let's not forget who really won in all of this. The citizens, who had been oppressed for years by these corrupt politicians, were now allowed to live a life in a society where their voice mattered. They weren't being silenced. They were being projected. This also brought in a national attention and highlighted the tension between returning soldiers and many corrupt governments, though no other events happened like this. Lastly, this is important because the corrupt government was replaced with real people who actually cared for their citizens. Many people abuse power whenever they take it, or are even given it, but these veterans were more worried about fixing the problems in their town and not taking power for themselves.